warranty. It's on a Saturday morning. We're up doing some Saturday morning cleaning, and I heard water trickling in a place that it shouldn't be. I go down in our basement over into the utility area, and there's a small drip of water coming out of our hot water tank. One side of me goes, okay, this is not how I intended to spend Saturday. The other side of me says, I thank God that we have this house warranty. So I get on the phone, I call them, and I said, hey, here's the situation. They give us a list of different companies to call. First company I call was not available. Second company I call was not available. Third company I call, this guy's available. We're the last call of his day. He shows up at noon, and by then this little drip has turned into a small river. Water's coming out, and the first thing I'm thinking is, great, they're going to have to replace this whole hot water tank. He comes down, seasoned gentleman, makes his way down the stairs to our basement. He goes to the hot water tank. He looks it over, and he says, oh, I can fix this. He goes to make an adjustment to fix what he thought he could fix, and instead it broke something else. And so now the river turns into an ocean, and water is flowing everywhere. My wife hears it and goes, what are we going to have to do? As she yells down the steps. I didn't have an answer. I'm too frustrated because in my mind, I just wanted him to fix what needed to be fixed. And to me, I thought he touched the wrong thing. Stay with me. So water's going everywhere. He didn't panic at all. Water surrounding our shoes. He says, don't worry, I can fix it. I'm looking at the water, and I'm looking at the water tank, and I'm going, in my mind, there's no solution to this. So he kicks his boots off, he walks back up the steps, he's going out to his van, I'm following behind him. I say, sir, why don't we just get a hot water tank? He said, you don't need a hot water tank. What you have is good, it just needs an adjustment. Needless to say, 15 minutes later, he goes to his truck, he comes back with something I've never seen before to go on this particular hot water tank that we had, and he says, this will do it. Now in my mind, I'm thinking, this is going to take a miracle because I don't see this stopping anything. 15 minutes later, he puts it in, he lays on his back, he tightens something up, the water stops, the hot water tank relights, and we use it another 10 years. What am I trying to say? His method to me was very unconventional. It did not make sense. And oh, by the way, my former life undergrad training is in electrical engineering, so I think systematically. He didn't follow any of my systems. It didn't make any kind of logical, practical, mechanical sense. And yet what he did in 15 minutes saved us needing a hot water tank for 10 years. All I'm trying to say is that sometimes God uses unconventional, unthought of, mind-blowing methods to show us that He is God. And all we need to do is have faith and trust Him even in the moments when life's scenarios don't make sense. So here it is. We see this man's circumstance. We see the clarification that Jesus brings. We see the commandment He gives. But we also see the controversy. Because please understand, friends, that if we are going to be people of faith in Jesus Christ, that automatically makes us controversial to a world that does not believe that Jesus is the only way. We live in a day and age where everybody's trying to create their own way and their own method to salvation. But when you believe, and I believe, that Jesus is the only way, it creates controversy. We are called to be controversial, not by the things we do, just by simply living a life by faith that we believe. This man begins to see, and then all of a sudden his eyesight makes him look different. So verses 8 and 9, we see the talk. The talk of the town is, who is that guy? That's the same guy that has been begging, because you have to understand in that day and age, if you were blind, you didn't have any other opportunity to raise the provisions that you needed. That came by begging. The blind person's way of life was begging their way through life. And so all people knew was that he was a blind man and that he was a beggar. And now all of a sudden, the talk of the village, of the town, is this blind man is now able to see. Who is he? Is he the same guy? I don't think he's the same guy. Some people think he's the same guy. But here's what captured my eye. In verse 9, when it says, no, but he is like him, he kept saying, I am the one. That word kept is in a tense where it was ongoing. He had to repetitively remind them that I am who I've always been. He had to constantly tell them that I'm not some other person. There's nothing that has changed except the fact that now I once was blind and now I can see. And so it sparks the issue and the controversy with the Pharisees, because they come to him in verse 10 and say, how did he open your eyes? How? How is this possible? And he responds, I love his answer in verse 11. His testimony he gives. He says, he answered, the man who is called Jesus made clay. The man who is called Jesus. At this point, he's not really clear who Jesus is. He doesn't have all the details. He doesn't have a theological construct. All he knows is a man named Jesus. And sometimes, friends, those of us who are theologically inclined struggle to be simplistic. Sometimes the only thing that someone needs to hear from us is about a man named Jesus. We don't need to debate doctrine. We don't need to debate where we come from. We don't need to debate denominationally. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we just need to be able to say that this man named Jesus did something miraculous that I cannot fully explain. He says this man named Jesus made clay and he anointed my eyes. That word anointed there means he rubbed and smeared clay. Spit-filled, muddy clay. Things that don't make sense, that should not be happening. He rubbed it on my eyes, and when he rubbed it on my eyes, he sent me away to wash, and I came back seeing. What I love then is they ask him where he is. He says, I do not know. Because what I love about that is this story, if you read all of chapter 9, this man's faith grows. First, Jesus illuminates him spiritually. He allows him to now see Jesus for who he is in the midst of a people who, while they had physical sight, had been spiritually blind. And as you climb the chapter, verse 25, all of a sudden the man begins to reason and say, wait a minute, the way you guys are approaching this man named Jesus, you're not understanding fully who he is. By the end of chapter 9, this man is confessing Jesus as Lord and Savior and worshiping, because faith brings about a process that takes the process. And we can rush somebody through it, but we have to trust that when God does something miraculous that we don't understand, that it is all right because Jesus is at work. I close with this. When I was in seminary, I had a professor. Went to a PCA seminary. Very rigid, very structured. Not necessarily bad, but in terms of when you talk about anything dealing with miracles and signs, very structured, as we should be. Because we live in a day and age where we have people who are fortunately taking advantage of people, but with things that are simply just aren't true. They're false. He told us this story. He said, I'll start this off by letting you know that I cannot fully explain all that happened. I just know that it happened. He was on a hiking trip with his son, who was 14 at the time. And halfway up this trip, his son fell, hit his head, split his head open. He said blood was gushing out everywhere, and he just knew his son was going to die. He said immediate panic set in for him because he believed that the last days he had with his son were now on the side of a mountain in a hopeless, helpless situation with blood spewing out of his body. And he said, I began to watch my son become lifeless. He said in that moment, he began to pray and just ask God, God, please, could you just do a miracle for my boy? He's my only child. First trip away. First time of being able to get away and spend time with him. And this happens. He said when he finished praying, because what they remembered going up the mountain, there was no one else out that day. They didn't even hear, he said, I didn't even hear any animals out. That's just how quiet it was. And he said, after I finished praying, I heard this couple laughing and joking. And they're coming up the mountain too. And it just so happened that the couple, the wife, was a 20-plus year RN. And it just so happened that in their book bags and backpacks, they had all the materials that were needed to stabilize his son. It just so happened that she was trained of what you would call today a nurse practitioner, that she had doctoral-like skills mixed with nursing skills. He said, that lady saved my son's life. And he said, I say to you, class, I can't explain it all. I don't have all the ways to articulate how they happen to be in the right place at the right time. He said, and I'm not one to go forward telling you that I believe that we're going to see just signs and miracles. He said, but what I can tell you is that on that day, on the side of that mountain, that Jesus performed a miracle and sent what was needed, and now my son is alive and well, and I thank him for it. All I want to leave you with today is that faith opportunities don't make sense, they hurt, they bring about oftentimes obstacles that we don't know how we're going to get around. They cause us to struggle with who we believe sometimes God to be, who we think Jesus is. And yet God says, I will use all of this to display my glory. So I'd much rather be suffering and being an instrument to be used for his glory than to be outside of him and to be struggling and think life is okay. Job helps me understand it. Job said, a man born of a woman is but a few days, but full of trouble. In this life we will have trouble, but please be of good cheer. The fact that we have trouble is not the end of the story. The story is ever going because Jesus is alive and well, and he's still bringing sight through the troubles and obstacles of man to life. I started this by telling you my daughter's story. At 13, while she can only have limited mobility, walks with a walker. She communicates in her own way. She has all the personality of any other teenager, with all the other ideals. And if she hasn't learned anything else, she knows how to say no. It doesn't make sense because most of those doctors after that fourth day thought that she would have no mobility. It doesn't make sense because most early on therapists would not engage because they didn't think therapy would work. But as I stand here today as a living witness, when she walks with her walker, she's walking freely and loving life. When she's in church, she's clapping and humming in her own way. She's celebrating who God is because she has a sense of who he is in her own way. Friends, let us trust God with every faith opportunity, because in those moments, God is doing some of his best revealing. He's allowing us to work while it is day, because there is a time when night will come. I thank you for enduring me this morning. I'm grateful to be among you. My prayer is that God will keep you and continue to strengthen you. Have a great rest of the morning. God bless.